Hey guys, it's me, Miss Sims. So my son is sick, and so I'm gonna have to take him to the doctor today and watch him today because he can't go where he normally goes since he's sick. So instead of doing a live Zoom, I went ahead and just recorded what would have been our live Zoom. So got a very short amount of notes. So basically, we're talking about the War of 1812. Essentially, it's like one slide that you have to write, and like two stories that I'm going to tell you. So it's fairly short. And then I'll go through the assignment that you guys were going to work on independently. So yeah, that'll kind of be today. So it'll probably feel pretty similar, except for you guys won't be like answering questions like you would be normally. Okay, so War of 1812, just a reminder of kind of what we've been talking about previously. We ended the American Revolution. We're our own nation. We had what was called the Articles of Confederation, and remember, those weren't great. They were kind of weak. That was kind of just like our governing laws that kind of dictated what our country could and couldn't do. And so we just recently talked about the creation of the Constitution and the different ideas that kind of built America to be kind of what it is. And so we talked about that we still use the Constitution today. Okay, so that has happened, and now we are going to get in a fight with Great Britain. Okay, so this is called the War of 1812. It's not a super long war, and anyways, see how it ends. Okay, so here we go. So the War of 1812 is against Great Britain. So remember, they're the ones that we fought in the American Revolution. So some people kind of see it as like an American Revolution Part 2. So what you need to know during this time period, America, the way that it makes money as a whole is it sells its goods to Europe, and then it buys goods from Europe. Okay, so that's called importing and exporting. Importing means you're taking it in, exporting means you're sending it out. Okay, so in order to do that, we have to go across the Atlantic. Okay, so that's the ocean that's between us and Europe. Okay, and so at this time period, France and Great Britain, guess what, are fighting again. During this time period, they are always fighting each other. Okay, and so they're fighting each other again. And as a result, Great Britain starts kidnapping soldiers and ships and forcing them to be a part of the British Navy. So I want you guys to think about how crazy this is. Like, we are not, like the Americans, we are not British citizens, but some of our folks are being kidnapped and forced to fight for the British, okay? Just like we were British citizens, but we're not. Okay, and this is called impressment. Okay, so that's an important word that you're going to need to know, impressment. So make sure that you've got that, underline it. That's a vocab word that is probably one of the most important ones from this War of 1812 period. Okay, also, at the same time, there are some Americans that believe that the British are paying the natives that are in North America, particularly that are living in what is now the United States, to fight and to cause trouble against the Americans. And part of this is out of spite, out of losing the American Revolution, and part of it is that the British want some of that land back that they lost during the American Revolution. Now, there's evidence that goes both ways about whether they were actually doing that. And so, in all honesty, they were probably doing it on a very small scale. It probably wasn't like this big, like, global conspiracy. But anyways, that's happening too. And so what you're going to have is you're going to have two groups of people. So one are called the War Hawks and one are called the Doves, which means that they're for peace. And so the folks, the War Hawks, that want to fight the British, really what they're after is some of the territories in what's like modern day Canada that the British had, and also to kind of reassert that like America is its own country, you can't do this. So there's people that are like pushing for war, and then there's other folks that are called the Doves that they don't want war. They're like, hey, wars are expensive. Do we really need to fight this? We've already beat them once. Let's just move on with our life. Like, we've got things that we've got to do. Well, anyways, newsflash, we end up going to war with them. And so the war starts in 1812. By the summer of 1814, the British are coming into DC, which is our capital at that time. So Madison is the president at that time, and most of DC has already evacuated. They've already fled. So in war, it is super common for the enemy to come and try to capture the capital. And so a lot of times that happens before like anything else. It's like kind of the first target. Okay. So a lot of people in DC have already kind of fled. Dolly Madison and her husband have not fled DC yet. And so the president goes and he is meeting with some troops somewhere else. And he asks Dolly, his wife, will you stay? Are you like strong enough? Are you brave enough? Will you stay in DC and kind of like gather up important state papers and things like that and wait for me to return? And so she said, yes, I will. And so she stays in the White House. Okay. And so a couple of days later, her husband is still not returned. And she's like looking, her and some servants are like looking out. I say servants, slaves, wrong word. Servants get paid, slaves don't. Slaves are looking out the window and they see that the British like are really, really coming. Like they're right there. And so at this point they decide, okay, we need to hightail it out. And there's kind of this like contingency plan where Dolly is going to meet her husband later if this ends up happening. And so Dolly says to one of her 15-year-old slaves, Paul Jennings, save the portrait. And this is the portrait that like you guys see right here. And she's talking about George Washington. Save the portrait or destroy it, because she did not want that getting in the hands of the British. So like as the British are like actually coming, they're trying to like get this portrait like off the wall, but it has been nailed, like the whole frame has been nailed into the wall. So she tells Paul Jennings, her slave, start breaking it apart, like just break it apart and we'll just take the canvas. Starts getting more intense. So they actually take a knife and they just and they like cut it out of the frame, roll it up, and she sends it with some of her friends to a nearby farm in DC to keep it safe. And she takes some other stuff. And Dolly Madison is really like seen as kind of a hero for saving this portrait. And today, this is the only thing that is in the current White House. So whenever it was like rebuilt, because you're going to see what happens, the current White House that is from that original White House. Okay. So anyways, Dolly Madison and them leave. The British come in. Reportedly, they sat down and they had a very nice dinner. They ate a lot of the food that was in the White House. They ate on the president's china. And then once they were done, they burned the house. Okay. And DC itself was kind of burned. And so the White House that we have today was rebuilt after the War of 1812. So it's not like the original White House. They didn't actually call it the White House. They called it the President's Mansion, but it was white, like the next one too. So they ended up starting calling it the White House. So anyways, that's just an interesting story about that. Okay, weeks later, like not a lot of weeks, a couple weeks later. Okay, we're still in, this is like 1814 at this point. So the war's been going on for like 2 years. There's this man and his name is Francis Scott Key. Actually, pause. Yes, I'm going to go ahead and tell you this story. Okay, so Francis Scott Key. So he is a businessman, and he goes to, he's in, it's like a bay or a port in Maryland. In Baltimore. And he goes to try to negotiate with the British to get one of his friends back. One of his friends has been captured. And while he's there, he finds out that the British are getting ready to attack and bombard, which means like put bombs on with cannons, the nearby city of Baltimore. So because he knows this, like he's able to like save his friend, the British are like, you guys can't leave until after this is over. So think about poor Francis Scott Key. Like he knows that the enemy is getting ready to bomb his country, and DC has just been burned like a couple of weeks ago. Like things are not looking good, and he is forced to stay like with the British and watch it happen, and they're going to let him go. Okay, and so spoiler alert, so I'm going to go ahead and get this before so we can go to the next slide. I'll come back to Francis Scott Key, so I'm coming back to that story, so just hang tight. Remember, he's like going to watch Baltimore there. Okay, eventually this ends in a stalemate, which means it's a tie. And all it's going to do is it's going to confirm that America is its own country and the British can't bully them. And the British are never going to get back that land that is the United States. Okay, so back to Francis Scott Keys. Okay, so this is the time where I would ask you guys to read these words. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? And I would ask you, like, where are these words from? And you guys would be like, oh, that sounds familiar. What's it from? Oh, yeah, the Star Spangled Banner. That's our national anthem. This is where the interactive part would have been more interesting than a video. But anyways, you guys would have got it. Okay, back to Francis Scott Keys. So Francis Scott Keys, when he's watching Baltimore, his city, burn from all the bombs, he writes this poem, which is this what you guys are seeing, this poem, and he's writing it about that night. And so if you guys start reading it, so it says, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night, or the ramparts we watch, so that's like the battles that we watch, so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting through air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. So at this point, he doesn't know who's going to win, and he thinks that the British flag, like that's the way that, like if you have a fort, so this is Fort McHenry, if you have a fort, whatever flag is at the top is who is in control. So the Americans were in control at the beginning, and so at the end of the night, he doesn't know if the British flag is going to be raised. So it's saying that the American flag, at the end of the night, the flag was still there. And so this is the actual flag that he's talking about. So this is actually on display in the Smithsonian in DC. And so he's talking about basically this moment that he's had to watch this whole night, like knowing that the British are going to destroy his city, and there's nothing he can do about it, and his country might be lost, and just all of these emotions, and he writes this poem about it. Okay, later on the poem is published in a newspaper, and then much later it is put to music, and it eventually is going to become our national anthem. Okay, and so like I told you in the last slide, the war ends in a stalemate, it ends in a tie, but it confirms that America is its own country and it can't be bullied around. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about, this is the definitive, which means it cannot be argued. This is the definitively best rendition of the American anthem that has ever been sung. Alrighty guys, this is where we're going to stop with the notes. Sorry if you watch the next video about the assignment. It'll explain what happened and all of this good stuff. Okay, so give me 1 second and I will end this video. We'll go from there.